Okay, so this is another screen capture narration for the MRK 460 class in the third week in October. So continuing from what we had done previously, I just want to get to the bottom of so you can see these columns are roughly a month. So this is mostly the stuff we do in September. This is mostly the stuff we do in October. This is mostly the stuff we do with November, but we actually started in here at the end of October. And this is sort of November and a couple of classes in December. So I want to go to the bottom of the October column. And we went past this very interesting section on viral marketing, but I didn't have a chance to get into talking about the 4 types of marketing. So make sure you just remind yourself of these things from MRK 106, the difference between market penetration and market development. Because that's the reason why people get involved in international business. Basically, they can't sell more to existing customers. They've already maxed out their business at home. They've got to go overseas. So examples of this would be Canada Goose. Just about everybody who wanted to buy a Canada Goose coat has already got one in Canada. So the only way that Canada Goose can expand and get more money for its shareholders and owners is to start selling to people who are outside Canada. Same thing with why Tim Hortons would want to expand into New York State. So that's market penetration. And when you can't sell to more existing customers, when you go overseas, it's market development. And the examples thereof. So then what I did was I put an international spin on it. And I talked about the example of Tim Hortons. And I made this little video here talking about marketing orientation for international business. And I talked about McDonald's and Honda and things like that. So that's what I want you to watch and make some comments on. All right. Now we're going to go up to the top of the October-November column and this big section on government influence on trade. And there's me with the International Trade Minister a few years ago. And I made a big point about why does government get involved in business? Well, basically because politicians who run the government want to get reelected. And the way they get reelected is by making it good for businesses. And when businesses do well, they hire people and people have jobs. If people don't have jobs, then they get frustrated. So you can look at the current situation in the United States right now where Donald Trump is trying to talk about make America great again and stuff like that. But he's dealing with the COVID crisis. And now, by late October 2020, there are thousands and thousands of thousands of Americans who have died because of COVID. And it's also affected the economy as well. And Donald Trump can't do a damn thing about that. So he's in danger of not getting reelected. Even though he may be saying a lot of negative things about the Democrats, Republicans aren't going to vote for someone who caused them to lose their job or is not going to help them get a job. So that's the key thing. Politicians get elected or reelected based on whether or not they help businesses run effectively. So what do? Well, government's got economic and non-economic reasons, which are explained right here. Economic reasons like unemployment, protecting young industries and so on, and non-economic reasons such as spheres of influence, cultural identity, and so on. And these are the list of all the different things that government does to intervene. They're sort of things of control. So basically it's divided into 2 main categories, tariff and non-tariff barriers. So tariff is just a fancy word for saying taxes. So the Canadian clothing industry is protected by taxes at the border to make it more expensive for Canadians to buy imported clothing from the United States and encouraged to buy Canadian clothing. But the bottom line is there's actually not much clothing made in Canada anymore. Most of it's done offshore. And then non-tariff barriers is a collection of a whole bunch of different things, such as dumping. So you click here, there's a bit of a description about dumping, plus this really interesting video using the example of BlackBerry, so you could watch that. That's a pretty common sense thing. And also what CBSA does, the Canada Border Services Agency, and some rulings on dumping, which are kind of interesting. So if you have a company involved in competing with businesses overseas, you can get the government to investigate and determine whether or not that product is being dumped, and then there can be ruling against it, which is what happened in this particular case here. Anti-dumping tariffs. So sometimes what happens is there may be a company accused of selling things at a low price. For example, the European Union was accusing Chinese companies of selling light bulbs at a very, very low price, even though the European Union itself, as a political entity, wanted to be able to have things that are more energy efficient. So there's kind of a bit of an argument there on both sides. Countervailing duties, sometimes when anti-dumping tariffs can't be because the bilateral regulations between countries, then there'll be countervailing duties put on. Subsidies, a big topic. And the one we used as an example was why the Canadian government would give multiple millions of dollars to the Toyota plant in Kitchener-Waterloo. First of all, Toyota is the parent company, but it's actually a Canadian company. Toyota Canada Inc. makes Canadian cars with Canadian parts and Canadian labor, even though it has a Japanese name in the title. So these cars are made in Canada and sold in Canada, and also many of them are exported to the United States. So this is a Canadian company making Canadian cars and exporting them to the United States. And the reason for subsidizing is because the car business is a big business, and these cars are not made here, they're assembled here from all component parts of all the little businesses in the Kitchener and Cambridge Waterloo area, which helps to pimp up the auto parts business throughout Southern Ontario, and helps the Ford plant in Oakville and the Honda plant in Alliston and the General Motors plant way over in Oshawa. So this is a good section to read about subsidies and why subsidies are good and bad and how they protect businesses. Quotas, an example of quotas would be Nissan cars. So Toyota cars are made in Canada, Honda cars are made in Canada, Nissan cars aren't. They're made in Mexico and the United States. So what the Canadian government does is say, well, we're not going to tax Nissan cars, but we're going to put a numerical limit on them coming in here. So you'll find sometimes that you can't get color variations or make some models or two-door versus four-door because the government just doesn't let that many in here. And some further examples down here. So there's a description in more detail talking about tariffs and some examples, and then we'll talk about this little unit talking about subsidies, and then these are quotas. Now this is a good example of some of the rare earth metals which are used for making certain types of electronic devices, and how the quota system there can be very effective in limiting people's access. So you should read that. And another example of binational policies. For example, the Canadian government insisting that Canadian military uniforms be made by manufacturers in Canada, even though there are virtually no companies left in a position to be able to do that. And this is a story talking about Canadian military trucks. And then there's a very interesting story talking about raisins, strawberry jam, and margarine, which I've discussed here, and you can also hear on this video as well. So that's this unit on government influence on trade, which covers all these topics down to here. Okay, then when we get back after the break week, we're going to get into foreign direct investment. Now, sounds kind of a boring topic, but basically what it means is going to another country, setting up operations, doing business there to either be able to export something to them or import as part of your supply chain management. And that's the part of international business that gets you to travel. So if you're interested in international business as a career opportunity and want to go travel around the world and do business, it's the FDI stuff that you want to learn about. We'll also talk in chapter number 8 about all these organizations that are involved, these non-governmental organizations like OECD and the European Union. And then we'll get into talking a little bit about foreign exchange market. And we'll talk about counter trade, which is growing in popularity. Then we'll get into the organizations like the IMF and the World Bank. And a little bit of discussion of these things in chapter number 11. But then we'll get into a very, very interesting section on political risk and contingency planning, in which I discuss some very interesting points about personal risk threat situations and how you can protect yourself when you personally travel around the world. And this also point about registering with the Canadian Embassy and the consequences of that for personal risk going to different countries. Then we'll also talk about the Canadian government and how that supports you, like the Export Development Corporation, Department of Foreign Affairs, and the Canadian Commercial Corporation as well. and then some of the reasons why we should export, and then the different entry modes and the varieties. And this is a hilarious video talking about this in a context. And then we'll talk about HR staffing policies. It's a very, very sensitive topic about ethnic circumstances and social cultural environment. Okay, so that's what you can look forward to in the following week after the break, and also what we did in class on October 20th, 21st, and 22nd. The class on the 22nd October, we didn't have that class because I was not available for personal reasons. I had to travel to another part of the province for something to do with the funeral in the family. I hope this is useful information.